watching Nile Cruise, and starting with our first segment and a political segment with some news. President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi issued Monday a presidential decree which hands off a number of previously presidential powers to Prime Minister Ibrahim Mahlab in accordance with the Constitution. Mahlab's new duties allow him to dispose of state property and the expropriation of property free of charge for the public benefit and protection of monuments, among others. Egypt's foreign minister and his Libyan counterpart announced an initiative on Monday to bring stability to Libya, including a plan to disarm warring militias that have wreaked havoc on the country in recent weeks. And also from another side, a piece of news, the Palestinians said Tuesday that they reached agreement with Israel on a permanent halt to 7 weeks of bloodshed in and around Gaza, although Israel was silent on the claimed deal. For this, we're joined with Dr. Mehanna, political analyst, to be discussing with us those topics and more. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Welcome, Dr. Emad.
Thank you very much.
Let me hang on to the last point that Chief mentioned about Gaza. Let's start off with the Gaza issue. And why do you think, in your opinion, it's taking so long to stop the bloodshed in Gaza?
I think the Israeli foreign minister, and particularly the issue of dealing with Gaza, has always been played under the table. And I think the absence of Egypt during the last 3 years after the revolution has really maximized the Israeli power to get away with a lot of crimes in Gaza. And the return of Egypt now, after the newly elected president, Mr. Sisi, now Egypt is regaining its position in the Middle East and creating that political and diplomatic balance in the region. And I think getting away with a lot of human crimes in Gaza has now become intolerable. And I think also the involvement of Egypt and the number of initiatives that have been proposed have also been played frankly and transparently with the Palestinians as well with the Israelis. As also Egypt has managed to create some sort of harmony between Hamas and Fatah to unite the Palestinians in the face of the Israeli terrorism. The number of weeks that has been taken, I think, in the beginning was due to the fact that Egypt was a bit absent. It's trying to regain its position, but I think it's never going to happen again, because Egypt is now going through a major reform, not just on an internal side, but also on a foreign relations and its rank and position in international relations.
So, Dr. Emad, if you can shed some light, if you have any information regarding the deal itself, because what the Palestinian has claimed victory after this deal immediately, yeah. And as I mentioned earlier, there was no any sort of statements from the Israeli side about the deal and the agreement that they have reached. From the other side, Palestinians are really claiming the victory and happy about what they achieved in terms of this war, a 50-day war.
I think the aspect of victory really differs from Palestinians to Israelis. Israelis have this morning claimed that they also achieved that victory over the Palestinians, but we need to look at what each one has really in mind in terms of that conflict. I think Israel was really aiming at destroying a large number of tunnels that Hamas and the Palestinians use across to Israel, and the second one is trying to break the military power and the smuggling of weapons that's going through Hamas from a number of countries, probably Hezbollah, as well as from other borders, Syria, etc. So from that angle, Israelis are really claiming that they've achieved 80% or more of what they intended to do.
Plus the assassination and
exactly, assassination of number of personalities they really were looking at, causing a lot of trouble. They also claiming that they won in terms of recapturing a number of prisoners that they've released them earlier. They also managed to get away with releasing the deal that they had with the Palestinians to release a number of prisoners from the Israeli prisons. They haven't been released.
So I think that's part of the agreement.
That's part of the third agreement. That was the third group that need to be released. They've never released it. From the Palestinian side, I think holding strong, that is considered a victory to the Palestinians. Also in terms of what the suffering, lack of electricity, lack of infrastructure, really in brief,
exactly.
They've been holding strong against the Israelis, causing a chaos and an instability in the Israeli streets. I think that's causing really a lot of hassle to the Israelis, and from the Palestinian point of view, they think they have achieved victory. But looking at the Palestinians, I don't think they have really achieved any victories, because they lost about 1,500 people killing and over 12,000 injuries, on top of the major damage to the infrastructure of Hamas. And I think it's going to cost them a lot of money to replace, and also it's going to make life hell for Palestinians to really get that back on.
Well, Dr. Emad, moving on to another also very important event that was going on during this week is what is happening in Libya. And we have the Egyptians living in Libya have been fleeing since the violence erupted, and thousands being stranded along the Tunisian border. And Egyptian officials have been trying to take extra measures to repatriate them. How is the situation in Libya at the moment affecting Egypt?
I think the situation in Libya is quite complex, because we find a lot of conflict between the democratic people led by some military officers against a number of tribes, and in the middle of that we've got our Muslim Brotherhood groups or terrorist groups that have taken Libya as a base for them to move and try to threaten the western border of Egypt. So Libya is really a complex situation, and the safety and security of Egypt relies quite a lot on the stability of the Libyan environment, because of smuggling of weapons, smuggling of a lot of drugs, and also a lot of terrorist groups are attacking Egypt from the western border. At the moment there is some breeze that there is some talks happening. The Egyptian Foreign Affairs is getting involved in trying to settle the situation among the tribes, and also help the people that want to enforce democracy to get back on and try to create that sort of stability. I think the Libyan people are not able to yet understand the danger they are in. I think there's a number of groups, whether they are tribes, terrorist groups, or even the army officials, are not able to understand the danger that Egypt is in, and they all fighting, thinking that they are building Libya. In fact, it's an internal conflict, and that's what NATO has caused them, and it's the same thing is happening in Syria, same thing is happening in Iraq. So the Libyans now need to start to think objectively that this is not going to come with any benefit to any of them. It's going to lead to the collapse of the entire Libya. And at the moment, I think there is major great movements from the Egyptian Foreign Affairs. Also, there is involvement yesterday and today from the Arab League, trying to put some efforts in there, whether financially, politically, or diplomatically. So we hope that this situation is going to be rectified quite soon.
In terms of Egypt's position, you know, with there is allegations around Egypt involved in airstrikes and stuff like that. How is the positioning now? How is the positioning today in terms of diplomatic relations with Libya?
I think Egypt has a right to use military forces against the terrorist groups in Libya, but I don't think Egypt is doing that, and will never do that. Egypt will never get into a foreign territories to use military force. Egypt at the moment is playing the diplomatic role, which is soft power that Egypt has lost in the last 3 years after the revolution. The soft power of Egypt now, and we can see that quite clear in Gaza agreement. We see this coming out quite clearly in the Libya settlement and the enforcement of peace. So Egypt is not using any military forces on the Libyan soil. At the moment, they're using the diplomatic forces and trying